The first signs appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning at the Global Space Observatory in New Mexico. Dr. Mark Wilson was staring at his monitor, coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth, when the readings started showing impossible numbers. At first, he thought the equipment was malfunctioning. "Hey Robert, come take a look at this," he called to his colleague. "I'm seeing some weird energy patterns at the edge of the solar system." The energy readings were like nothing they'd ever seen before. Massive spikes of power that seemed to ripple through space itself. Within hours, observatories across the globe were reporting the same phenomenon. Something massive was happening at the very edge of human scanning range. The military got involved 3 days later when their satellites began experiencing unexpected interference. Communication systems flickered, and GPS coordinates jumped erratically. In orbit, the International Space Station's crew reported strange visual distortions, like heat waves in space, spreading across their view of the stars. "We're seeing something being built out there," reported Commander Lisa Brown from the ISS. "It's hard to describe, but there are structures appearing. Massive ones. They're creating some kind of pattern around the solar system." World leaders gathered for an emergency meeting as more evidence poured in. Whatever was happening, it was orchestrated and purposeful. Humanity watched, helpless, as an immense construction project unfolded around their solar system. The structures appeared to be made of some kind of dark, almost liquid-like material that bent light around it. The first clear images came from the Deep Space Probe near Jupiter. They showed massive ships, each larger than Earth's moon, methodically placing and connecting huge sections of what looked like a mesh or web in space. The beings operating these ships were clearly not human. Panic began to spread as the reality of the situation sank in. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their first contact was watching an alien race build something around their entire solar system. The answer to what they were building came exactly 2 weeks after the first energy readings. Every screen on Earth, phones, computers, televisions, suddenly displayed the same message. The aliens called themselves the Wardens, and they had come with a purpose. To the species known as humans, the message began in perfect English. "Your civilization has been assessed and classified as a Level 5 expansion risk to galactic stability. Your rapid technological advancement, combined with your species' documented aggressive tendencies, requires immediate containment action." The message went on to explain that Earth and its solar system were being enclosed in what they called a protective quarantine field. The Wardens claimed this was standard procedure for species that developed too quickly without developing the necessary restraint. Dr. Wilson, who had first noticed the energy readings, stood in the observatory's main hall with hundreds of his colleagues, watching the message repeat. "They're building a cage," he said quietly. "They're actually building a cage around our entire solar system." Military responses proved futile. Every missile or probe launched toward the construction simply disappeared, absorbed by the strange dark material. The Wardens ignored all attempts at communication beyond their initial message, focused entirely on their work. As the last sections of the containment field were put in place, the truth became unavoidable. Humanity was being imprisoned in their own solar system. The cage, as people quickly began calling it, was designed to prevent any form of space travel beyond the solar system's boundaries. The final message from the Wardens was brief. "The containment field is now active. Any attempt to breach the barrier will result in immediate energy dispersal. This measure is permanent and non-negotiable. Your species will be monitored for signs of developmental progress." But even as fear and anger spread across Earth, something else emerged: determination. In labs and military bases around the world, humans began studying the barrier, looking for weaknesses. The Wardens had built their cage with supreme confidence, believing they understood exactly what they were containing. They would soon learn that humans had never taken well to being caged, and this cage, no matter how advanced, had been built with one critical flaw. It was designed to contain a logical, predictable species. Humanity was neither. The game was just beginning. The barrier shimmered like oil on water, visible only when the light hit it just right. Scientists around the world worked day and night to understand its nature. Their findings were both fascinating and terrifying. Dr. Peter White, leading the research team at the International Space Center, discovered that the cage wasn't just a simple wall. It was an intricate web of overlapping fields and forces. It's like they've woven the fabric of space itself into a net, he explained during a global broadcast. The technology is beyond anything we've ever imagined. The containment field had multiple layers. The outer layer was a quantum-locked barrier that prevented physical objects from passing through. Behind that was a gravitational distortion field that would tear apart anything that somehow made it past the first layer. The final layer was an energy dispersal grid that would dissolve any remaining matter into its basic particles. Military satellites that got too close simply vanished. Probes sent to test the barrier disappeared without a trace. The wardens had built their cage with thorough precision, using technology that made Earth's most advanced systems look like children's toys. 3 months after the cage's completion, the wardens sent another message. Your species has demonstrated concerning patterns of behavior. Your rapid technological advancement, coupled with your history of conflict, presents an unacceptable risk to galactic stability. This containment measure is necessary for the greater good. In underground facilities across the globe, military leaders met to discuss options. Commander Tom Reed, heading the newly formed Barrier Analysis Program, gathered the best minds humanity had to offer. We need to understand what we're up against, he told his team. Every cage has a weak point. We just need to find it. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young physicist named Mary Cooper noticed something strange in the barrier's energy readings. The field strength fluctuates, she reported to Commander Reed. It's subtle, but it's there. It's responding to something. Further tests revealed that the barrier wasn't static. It was actively adjusting itself, responding to various forms of energy and matter. The wardens had built an adaptive system, one that could counter any conventional attempt to breach it. But the cage's very sophistication provided the first clue to its potential weakness. The system was incredibly complex, requiring constant adjustments and calculations to maintain its integrity. And complex systems, as any engineer knew, had more points of potential failure. They built this cage based on their understanding of physics, Dr. White explained during a classified briefing. But more importantly, they built it based on their understanding of how a species should behave. They're expecting logical, methodical attempts to break through. The wardens maintained a presence just beyond the barrier, massive ships patrolling regularly. They watched Earth's attempts to study the cage with what seemed like amusement, clearly confident in their containment system. Commander Reed established listening posts throughout the solar system, gathering data on the wardens' movements and the barrier's behavior. They're not just keeping us in, he realized. They're studying us. We're some kind of experiment to them. The cage had transformed human society. Nations that once fought each other now work together, united by their common imprisonment. Resources previously spent on warfare were redirected to science and space exploration. Humanity's focus shifted from earthly conflicts to the stars, and the barrier that kept them from reaching them. 6 months after the cage's completion, Commander Reed called a secret meeting of world leaders. The wardens think they've contained us, he said, spreading out the data his team had gathered. But they've made a crucial mistake. They built this cage assuming we would try to break it using pure force or technology. They never considered that we might find another way entirely. As he spoke, Mary Cooper's team was making another discovery, one that would change everything. The barrier's response to human activity wasn't just mechanical. There was something else, something in the way human consciousness itself interacted with the quantum fields. The cage was about to face something it wasn't designed to handle: human ingenuity. The breakthrough came on a rainy Wednesday morning in the underground research facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Dr. Amanda Wells had been staring at test results for hours when the pattern finally emerged. "Look at this," she called to her team, pointing at the holographic display. Every time we run tests on the barrier, it responds differently to human operators than to automated systems. At first, I thought it was just random variation, but it's not. It's consistent. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The Warden's containment field, for all its technological sophistication, had a fundamental flaw. It hadn't been designed with human consciousness in mind. The barrier operates on quantum principles, Dr. Wells explained to the Emergency Council. But human consciousness affects quantum systems in ways that are completely different from other species. The Wardens built this cage assuming all sentient beings would interact with quantum fields the same way they do. In the testing chamber, researchers began conducting new experiments. They found that when human operators focused their attention on specific points in the barrier, subtle changes occurred in its energy pattern. It was as if the mere act of human observation was causing fluctuations in the cage's structure. The Wardens are logical beings, Professor Robert Miller added during the briefing. They built this cage using pure mathematics and physics. But humans, we're anything but logical. Our minds operate in ways they couldn't predict or account for. The research team discovered something else. The barrier's response varied depending on the mental state of the human operators. Strong emotions, particularly determination and focused intent, seem to create larger disturbances in the field. It's like the old quantum physics principle, Dr. Wells explained. The observer affects the observed. But in our case, human observation affects these fields more strongly than the Wardens anticipated. They built their cage for a predictable species. We're anything but predictable. The Wardens, monitoring from their massive ships beyond the barrier, showed no signs of concern. To them, the humans' experiments probably looked like primitive attempts to understand their superior technology. They couldn't detect the subtle ways human consciousness was interacting with their containment field. In a secure room deep underground, Dr. Wells demonstrated the effect to Commander Reed. She had volunteers focus their attention on a small section of a captured barrier fragment. The energy readings fluctuated wildly, showing patterns that shouldn't have been possible according to the Warden's calculations. They thought they were containing a species that would try to break out using ships, weapons, or technology. Commander Reed said, watching the readings. They never considered that our minds themselves might be the key. The implications were staggering. The Wardens had created their cage using their own understanding of the universe, an understanding that, while far advanced beyond human technology, had a critical blind spot. They hadn't accounted for the unique way human consciousness interacted with reality at the quantum level. More tests revealed that group focus amplified the effect. When multiple humans concentrated on the same point in the barrier, the fluctuations grew stronger. It wasn't just affecting the barrier. It was actually creating temporary weaknesses in its structure. "We need to keep this quiet," Commander Reed ordered. "If the Wardens realize what we've discovered, they might try to modify the barrier. Right now, our greatest advantage is that they don't know their cage has this weakness." Dr. Wells and her team worked around the clock, documenting every aspect of human barrier interaction. They found that different mental states produce different effects. Creative thinking, emotional intensity, and focused willpower all created unique patterns in the barrier's quantum field. The Wardens built this cage thinking they understood exactly what they were containing, Dr. Wells told her team. But they didn't account for human consciousness, human creativity, or human determination. They built a logical cage to contain a logical species, and that's not what we are at all. As the research continued, one thing became clear. The path to freedom wouldn't be found in technology alone. The key to breaking the cage lay in the very thing that made humans unique, their minds. When nations across Earth received the classified data about human consciousness affecting the barrier, the response was unprecedented. For the first time in human history, every major power agreed to work together on a single goal, Project Freedom. In the heart of Switzerland, deep beneath the Alps, they built the Global Coordination Center. Representatives from every nation gathered there, pooling their resources and knowledge. The center's main hall housed the largest quantum monitoring system ever built, designed to track the slightest changes in the Warden's barrier. "We need to be careful," Commander Reed warned during the first international meeting. "The Wardens are watching. They can't know what we're really building." So they disguised their true work behind a facade of normal scientific research, constructing what appeared to be standard research facilities around the globe. The real work happened underground. Engineers developed new devices that could amplify and focus human brainwave patterns. Dr. Wells led the team designing what they called consciousness amplifiers, machines that could strengthen the natural effect humans had on the barrier's quantum field. "Each person's mind creates a unique pattern," she explained to the project leaders. "When we combine multiple patterns in the right way, the effect on the barrier grows exponentially. We're not trying to break through with force. We're trying to unravel it using our minds." The first tests were promising. Small groups of volunteers, using the amplifier technology, could create visible distortions in the barrier. The Wardens noticed these disturbances but dismissed them as harmless anomalies. Their reports, intercepted by Earth's listening posts, showed they believed humans were simply conducting primitive experiments on the barrier. Professor Miller developed a training program to help people focus their mental energy more effectively. "It's like learning to play an instrument," he told the volunteers. "Each person needs to find their own mental frequency that resonates with the barrier." Around the world, secret facilities began preparing for what they called the Symphony, a coordinated attempt to create multiple weaknesses in the barrier simultaneously. They needed thousands of trained volunteers, each capable of maintaining intense mental focus for extended periods. The Wardens continued their regular patrols, their massive ships gliding silently beyond the barrier. They observed Earth's apparent attempts to study their technology with what seemed like amused tolerance. Their cage had contained dozens of species before. They had no reason to think humans would be any different. But humans were different. In meditation chambers across the globe, people learned to project their consciousness in ways that directly affected the quantum fields. Artists, scientists, soldiers, and civilians, people from all walks of life joined the project, each bringing their unique mental patterns to the effort. "Look at this," Dr. Wells said one day, showing Commander Reed the latest test results. "When we combine creative thinking with focused determination, the effect is twice as strong. The barrier doesn't know how to handle human unpredictability." The project faced its share of challenges. Some volunteers couldn't maintain the necessary focus. Equipment malfunctioned. There were debates about the best approach. But with every setback, human determination grew stronger. 6 months into the project, they achieved their first major breakthrough. A team of 50 volunteers, using the latest version of the consciousness amplifiers, created a temporary fluctuation in the barrier large enough to send a probe through. The probe was destroyed by the secondary layers of the cage, but the message was clear. Their approach was working. "We're not ready for a full attempt yet," Commander Reed told the world leaders. "But we've proven the concept. The cage wasn't built to contain minds like ours. We can affect it in ways the Wardens never imagined possible." As the project entered its final phases, there was a sense of quiet confidence in the underground facilities. The Wardens had built their cage with all the advanced technology at their disposal, but they had overlooked something fundamental: the unique power of human consciousness. The stage was set for humanity's first real attempt at breaking free. All they needed now was time to perfect their technique and gather their strength. The cage that was never meant to contain humans was about to face its greatest test. The day of humanity's first coordinated strike against the barrier began in perfect silence. Around the solar system, specially equipped ships moved into position, each carrying teams of trained volunteers and consciousness amplifiers. Captain James Morrison, commanding the lead vessel near Jupiter's orbit, watched his tactical display as green lights indicated all ships were in place. "All teams, commence mental synchronization," he ordered through the secure quantum channel. In meditation chambers throughout the fleet, thousands of volunteers began their carefully practiced routines, focusing their minds on specific points in the barrier. The Warden's patrol ships continued their regular routes, their sensors detecting nothing unusual. The humans had learned to mask their activities, making their preparations appear as normal space traffic and research operations. "Energy readings are climbing," reported the science officer on Morrison's bridge. On screens across the fleet, they could see the barrier beginning to react. Where human consciousness focused on it, the quantum field showed signs of instability, creating rippling patterns in its otherwise smooth surface. The first unexpected discovery came 3 hours into the operation. As the combined mental energy of the volunteers built up, the barrier didn't just weaken. It began to resonate with human brain patterns in ways their simulations hadn't predicted. The effect was stronger than anything they'd seen in testing. "The barrier's quantum matrix is becoming unstable at multiple points," Dr. Wells reported from the control center on Earth. It's trying to adapt to our mental patterns, but can't quite manage it. We're overloading its ability to maintain coherence." Then something remarkable happened. A small research vessel, piloted by Lieutenant David Brown, slipped through a temporary rupture in the barrier's outer layer. It was humanity's first breach of the cage. But it wasn't over. The ship still had to contend with the gravitational distortion field and energy dispersal grid. The Wardens finally noticed something was wrong. Their massive ships began moving toward the disturbances, their sensors probing the weakened areas of the barrier. But they were too late to prevent what happened next. Using the distraction created by Brown's breach, 3 more ships pushed through different sections of the barrier. The Warden's system, designed to track and stop conventional escape attempts, struggled to respond to multiple simultaneous breaches created by human consciousness. "The barrier's trying to repair itself," Morrison observed, watching the energy readings. "But it can't predict where we'll strike next, because it can't predict how human minds will behave. We're not following any pattern it recognizes." 2 ships were lost to the barrier's defensive layers, their crews evacuating just in time in special pods designed to slip back through the weakened points. But Lieutenant Brown's vessel, riding a wave of focused human mental energy, managed to push through all 3 layers of the cage. For the first time since the barrier's creation, a human-made object existed outside its confines. The achievement lasted only moments before the ship had to retreat, but it proved what they had theorized. The cage could be beaten. The Warden's response was immediate and massive. Their ships converged on the breach points, energy weapons charging. But they weren't firing at the human vessels. They were trying to reinforce the barrier itself, proving they recognized the true threat. "All ships, fall back to safe positions," Morrison ordered. They had achieved their objective, proving the barrier could be breached, and there was no need to risk further losses. As the fleet retreated, the Wardens frantically worked to repair the damage to their containment system. In the Global Coordination Center, Dr. Wells and her team analyzed the data from the attempt. "The barrier's quantum field is more vulnerable to human consciousness than we thought," she reported to Commander Reed. "But more importantly, the Wardens don't understand how we did it. They're trying to patch the barrier against conventional attacks, but they still haven't realized our true method." The first strike had succeeded beyond their expectations, though not without cost. They had proved the cage could be broken, but they had also lost good people in the attempt. Yet across the solar system, hope spread as news of the breakthrough reached Earth's population. The Warden's cage had been breached, and there was no way to hide that fact. Humanity's path to freedom was becoming clear, one mental battle at a time. In the days following humanity's first successful breach, the Wardens launched into a frenzy of activity. Their massive ships swarmed around the barrier, installing new layers of quantum shielding and energy matrices. The cage was being reinforced, but not in the way humans expected. "They still don't understand how we did it," Dr. Wells noted, studying the Warden's modifications. "They're strengthening the barrier against physical attacks, but they haven't addressed its vulnerability to human consciousness. They can't fix what they don't comprehend." More interesting was what the science team discovered about the barrier's energy system. Each time the wardens added new defenses, they had to draw power from the existing structure. The cage was becoming more complex, but also more delicately balanced. "It's like a house of cards," Professor Miller explained during the emergency council meeting. "The more layers they add, the more unstable the whole system becomes. And here's the fascinating part: we can use their own energy against them." Commander Reed mobilized the fleet for a series of small, coordinated tests. Ships positioned themselves at key points around the solar system, each carrying teams of volunteers trained to focus their mental energy in specific ways. They weren't trying to break through. They were mapping the barrier's new energy flows. Every time they strengthen one section, Dr. Wells reported, they have to draw power from somewhere else. The cage isn't just a barrier anymore. It's becoming a massive energy network, and networks can be overloaded. The wardens seemed to grow more agitated with each test. Their ships moved in increasingly erratic patterns, responding to disturbances that their sensors could detect but couldn't explain. They knew something was wrong with their containment system but couldn't identify the cause. In underground facilities across Earth, engineers developed new versions of the consciousness amplifiers. These devices were smaller, more powerful, and capable of focusing human mental energy with unprecedented precision. Each was calibrated to target specific frequencies in the barrier's quantum field. "We're not just looking for weak points anymore," Dr. Wells told her team. "We're learning to create them. The barrier's own energy can be redirected if we apply the right kind of mental pressure in the right places." The plan that emerged was both simple and audacious. Instead of trying to punch through the barrier directly, they would use human consciousness to create resonance patterns in its energy field. Like a wine glass shattered by the right musical note, the cage could be broken by hitting its resonant frequencies. The wardens built this system assuming it would only have to deal with logical, predictable attacks. Commander Reed explained to world leaders, "But human consciousness doesn't follow their rules. Every time they try to adapt their defenses to one type of mental pattern, we can shift to another." Preparation for the final operation began in secret. Ships were positioned in a complex geometric pattern around the solar system, each location carefully chosen to maximize its effect on the barrier's energy flow. Teams of volunteers practiced synchronizing their mental patterns, learning to shift their focus in perfect harmony. The wardens continued their frantic reinforcement of the cage, unaware that each new layer of defense only made their system more vulnerable to the kind of attack humans were planning. Their ships moved constantly, patrolling for conventional threats while completely missing the real danger. "They think technology alone can contain us," Dr. Wells said, watching the final preparations. "They don't understand that human consciousness isn't bound by their physical laws. We don't just think outside their box. We don't even see the box the same way they do." As the last pieces fell into place, a quiet confidence spread through the human fleet. The wardens had built their cage with all the advanced technology at their disposal, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that containing a species meant only containing their bodies and their machines. They never realized that human minds could reach beyond physical barriers, that human consciousness could affect reality in ways their science couldn't explain. Their cage was about to face something it was never designed to handle: the combined mental power of a species that refused to be contained. The stage was set for humanity's final bid for freedom. The cage that was meant to hold them would soon become the instrument of their liberation. The final operation began at precisely midnight UTC. Across the solar system, thousands of volunteers in hundreds of ships simultaneously focused their minds on carefully selected points in the barrier. Captain Morrison, watching from the command ship, saw the first signs of the cage's response within seconds. "Energy fluctuations detected in all target zones," reported his science officer. "The barrier's quantum field is responding exactly as predicted. Pattern synchronization at 80% and climbing." The warden's patrol ships immediately detected the disturbances, but their response showed their continuing confusion. They rushed to reinforce the barrier at the points of obvious stress, not realizing these were merely decoys. The real attack was happening at a quantum level they couldn't perceive. The barrier's energy matrix is beginning to oscillate, Dr. Wells announced from Earth Control. All teams, shift your mental focus to your secondary targets. Let's set up the resonance pattern. Like a massive musical instrument being played by thousands of minds, the barrier began to vibrate with complex patterns of energy. The warden's reinforcements actually helped, adding more power to the system that humans were learning to manipulate. The first major breakthrough came near Saturn. A section of the barrier not only weakened but began to unravel, its energy flowing into patterns shaped by human consciousness. The wardens frantically tried to repair it, but their efforts only created more instabilities. "They're doing exactly what we predicted," Commander Reed observed. "Every repair attempt is making the cage more complex, more unstable. All teams, increase mental pressure. Push them to keep reinforcing." The scene in space became chaotic. The warden's ships darted from point to point, trying to contain multiple cascading failures in their containment system. The barrier flickered with strange lights as quantum fields collapsed and reformed in ways its designers had never intended. Then came the moment they had been waiting for. Near Jupiter, a complete section of the barrier simply dissolved, its energy absorbed and redirected by the focused power of human consciousness. Before the wardens could respond, 3 more sections collapsed in rapid succession. "The cascade effect is starting." Dr. Wells's voice was tight with excitement. "The barrier's own energy is turning against itself. All teams, maintain focus. Don't let them stabilize it." The wardens finally seemed to realize what was happening, but it was too late. Their cage, designed to contain physical beings using physical laws, was being undone by something they had never accounted for: the power of human consciousness to affect reality at its most fundamental level. Captain Morrison watched in awe as entire sections of the barrier began to dissolve. "All ships, prepare for breakthrough. Stay with your assigned groups and remember your escape vectors." The barrier's collapse accelerated, spreading like cracks in glass. Where it broke, it released enormous amounts of energy, which human minds immediately redirected to create more breaks. The cage was not just being broken, it was being unmade. The warden's ships began to retreat, their certainty shattered along with their containment system. They had never seen anything like this, a species using consciousness itself as a weapon against quantum physics. "The barrier's integrity is failing completely," reported Earth Control. "All ships, proceed with breakthrough. Freedom corridors are opening across all sectors." Humanity's fleet moved forward, ships passing through the dissolving barrier in coordinated groups. The wardens could only watch as their supposedly impenetrable cage collapsed around them. As his ship crossed the boundary that had contained humanity for so long, Captain Morrison sent one final message to the retreating wardens: "You built a cage for our bodies, but you could never contain our minds. Remember that before you try to imprison another species." The aftermath was beyond anything they had planned for. The barrier's collapse released enormous amounts of energy into space, creating spectacular auroras visible from Earth. But more importantly, it marked humanity's emergence as a force the galaxy would have to reckon with. In the years that followed, the wardens and other alien races would come to understand their mistake. They had tried to contain humanity using physical means, never realizing that human consciousness itself was the key to their freedom. The cage that was never meant to contain humans had failed, and in doing so, had taught the galaxy a valuable lesson. Never underestimate a species that refuses to accept limitations, even those written into the fabric of space itself.